positive approaches for food security, results of empirical research in Vietnam. So we'll give it 1 or 2 more minutes to hope to get a few more people to come back in the room. I know these lunches can be very long and the food is actually very good. But yeah, let's give it 1 more minute, but we also have an online, we have online participants and we have actually a lot of online presenters and they're all ready and waiting to join this session. But let's give it 1 more minute. Okay, so I suggest we get started. I expect a few more people will trickle in, but the people who are on time, they should not be punished by the fact that the rest is still having a second coffee. So, and coffee, I guess, is very well connected with Vietnam as well. So let's get right into this session. So this is, I think, again, a session that focuses on the nature-based component of this important food forum that is trying to connect climate, food, and nature. And this particular session is being organized by the CGIAR Initiative on Nature Positive Solutions. And that particular initiative works toward co-creating and implementing nature positive solution-based agri-food systems approaches that support both people and the planet. And this particular deep dive session focuses squarely on Vietnam, which is one of the countries where this initiative is operating. And I would like now to introduce our introductory welcome speaker, who will just give us a bit more background on the initiative. And her name is Christine Davis, and she is with the International Food Policy Research Institute. So welcome, Christine. If we could hopefully see you on screen. To give your welcome remarks.
Thanks very much, Claudia. I think I'm there now. And welcome to everyone. Thanks so much for joining this deep dive session on nature positive solutions and approaches for food security. We'll be looking at results of empirical research in Vietnam. But I know several of you are interested in the implications for the Philippines and other countries and areas as well. So hopefully we'll get into that in the discussion. For the next hour and a half, we'll be presenting some of these findings from the Nature Positive Solutions Initiative of the CGIAR, which Claudia has explained a little bit. What we are doing in Vietnam in particular is working in the northwestern Vietnamese provinces of Lao Cai and Son La, so we'll be presenting results mainly from there. When we talk about nature positive solutions, these are practices that provide food security, they help provide livelihoods for farmers, but they also don't harm the environment. So we're talking about things that you'll hear about a little bit, like biological pesticides, conservation of agrobiodiversity, native tree planting, composting, and things like that. There's 4 presenters, and we'll look first at links between adoption of nature positive solutions and food security with Sedi Bukaka from IFPRI. Then Diego Naziri will discuss a baseline on agrobiodiversity conservation in Vietnam. Rina Jalonen will look at native tree diversity. And then Salome Gebre-Exapia will look at the needs and the opportunities for circular economy in food systems transformation. We have Julian Gonsalves from the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction and Tung Nguyen from the International Fund for Agricultural Development, who will be providing some remarks on the papers that will be presented, but then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers and discussion led by Claudia Ringler, who you've already heard from. And you do see that there's a Q&A chat that we can already start using, but I'll let Claudia determine who's going to answer live and if there's going to be any Q&A during the session. And then Claudia is also going to close because Carlo Fada, who's the lead of the initiative, is ill. So unfortunately, he won't be here today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Sadie Bukaka. So you can go ahead and share your slides. And you have 10 minutes. Claudia, I think, will be keeping time as well. So over to you, Sadie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Thank you so much, Christine. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes. Yeah, we see you. We see the slides. They're just not in mode yet, but you're getting there.
Yes. Let me. Okay. Great. Presentation mode. Is that fine? Yeah?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so good morning for some of you, good afternoon for most of you, and thank you for having me. So today I will be talking about some of the preliminary takeaways of the Nature Plus baseline household survey carried out in Vietnam, and in particular how nature positive interventions can contribute to food security based on insights from the survey. So first, a little bit about the survey design and sample composition. So the survey was designed to cover the areas concerned with nature positive initiatives, of course, in the districts of Sapa and Mae Son. The treated sample in the two districts was obtained through a random sample selection of households after household listing exercise that was carried out in the 8 identified treated villages. And control villages were chosen based on similarities in agroecological zones, and control households were then drawn also randomly. Sorry, I'm wondering if you're hearing me well?
Yeah, Sadie, we're hearing you fine. It's no problem at all. Is there a problem with your connection? Because it'd be great if you can turn your camera on too.
Okay, let me check why it's not.
The sound is fine.
Because I can hear some, wait, why is it not on?
There is some background noise. Let me check because I have hosting, but I think, yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure why and what I can do. Well, let me go ahead in the interest of time. Sorry about that. So the survey ultimately was conducted in 23 villages across those two districts with a total household size of 1,200 households. Yeah, and just to kind of note that shortly prior to the beginning of this data collection, the team was informed that a similar survey targeting defined beneficiaries in the same areas was also envisaged. So we basically added those beneficiaries to the survey. Okay, so what can this survey tell us about food security? Let me just start with going back to the definition of food security. So food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food, which meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. So this is the regular World Food Summit 1996 definition. And this definition leads us to 4 main dimensions of food security, which are food availability, of course, which addresses the supply side of food security. And information collected through the survey regarding crop and livestock production, crop yields, but also crop diversity are indicators that we can use to assess this dimension. We have also economic and physical access to food as a dimension, and in particular, the economic aspects of the access to food implies that households have the financial ability to acquire adequate amounts of food to meet their requirements, right? So here, indicators such as income, food expenditure, constructed based on survey variables can help assess this dimension. Then we have food utilization, which corresponds to the way the body makes the most out of various nutrients in the food. Related indicators are here energy and nutrient intakes and diet diversity that ideally should be collected at the individual level, but that we are able to observe in our case with this data at the household level. And finally, the stability component that relates to stability of the other three dimensions over time. Unfortunately, in this case, data available to us through this survey do not give us much insight on this particular dimension. So now what about the adoption of nature positive solutions in our sample? So in Vietnam, respondents were asked about their use of a series of around 40 nature positive practices in their agricultural activities. And here in this slide shows the top solutions adopted by our farmers. What is immediately noticeable is there's high adoption rates for manure fertilizer, of course, but also for other practices such as construction of bands, terraces, and other structural soil conservation methods. We also have high adoption rates for the use of selective pesticide, the reduction of prophylactic spraying, and the reduction of chemical pesticides use, which are among those top practices. And the high ranking of those practices do suggest an increased adoption of more sustainable farming methods in an area where we know that we have high rates of pesticide, herbicides, and synthetic fertilizer usage. So overall, we find that households reported using on average 5 nature positive practices, and 82% of the one practicing reported using them for more than 5 years, which indicates quite some standing and commitment towards these practices. And as of now, meaning at baseline, what we observe is that information about those practices are mostly received from relatives and friends. So again, to recall, this survey is a bit a baseline. So we are not able yet to take advantage of our two comparison groups, meaning treated and control, to understand whether the intervention had indeed a causal impact on food security. However, what we can do is to take advantage of the important variations that already exist in the sample in terms of the intensity of adoption. And we can do that by classifying our sample in 3 categories. First, the non-adopters, which are those households that reported using 0 nature positive solutions and which represent 20% of the sample. Then we have a low adoption group composed of households using up to 5 nature positive practices and correspond to 49% of the sample, and a high adoption group that represents 31% of the sample, with those also that report using more than 5 practices. So let me go a little bit faster and go directly to the preliminary results. So based on this classification and keeping in mind our 3 components of food security, we want to look at summary statistics related to availability and access to food, disaggregated by adoption type. So a nice way to do that, rather than using only averages, is to compare empirical cumulative distribution functions, which we call CDFs, which are very useful to understand in comparing different groups, which group is better off. And here I had a whole little explanation, but basically to go a little bit faster, whenever you have a distribution that is below the others, it means that the population there is better off. So here, I hope you can see the difference in colors. You have high adopters in green, low adoption in gray, and non-adopters in blue. And what we see when we look at crop diversity index, rice yields, and yearly per capita expenditure with those 3 CDFs first, but also averages for household dietary diversity score, what we see is that nature positive adoption intensity is positively associated with crop diversity. On the top, on the left, right, the high adoption distribution is below, so this population is better off, but also with living standards. You see that with the yearly per capita expenditure CDF. And you also have higher averages for household diet diversity scores. So which could imply, or better, which gives an indication that high adoption of nature plus practices can contribute to wider range of food items, contributing then to improved nutrition, but also more resilient agricultural systems, reducing risk of food shortages, and potentially higher living standards, contributing to better access to food. And here, and also a very nice and interesting results is that the lack of differences in yields shows also that nature plus solution can support productivity without necessarily relying on environmentally unsustainable inputs. So I only have 1 minute left, so I'm going to show you another set of CDF very quickly to look at food utilization. We use the same methodology. We look at the free distribution of high adopters, low adoption, and non-adopters. And again here, for calorie intake, fat intake, protein intake, and carbohydrate intake, we have a consistently high adoption that exhibits dominance. So meaning that high adopters have higher average calorie intake and macronutrients, contributing to potentially better nutritional outcomes, better health outcomes, and yes, overall nutritional outcomes. High adopters are better off. So although we cannot talk about impact just yet, what we wanted to do is to go beyond just descriptive statistics and have just a little multivariate regression here, very simple. As you can see, we regress calorie intake and macronutrient intake on adoption types, controlling for a series of covariates related to household composition, etc. And what we see is that we have significant and positive coefficients across all dependent variables. So we have a positive conditional correlation between adoption intensity of sustainable practices and food intake. So that's it. I have my conclusion slides, but I guess the overall message here is that adoption of nature plus practices is positively associated, right? We have no causality, but still positively associated with several outcomes related to food security. And this is a very good indication, even if we're not talking about impacts for future research. Sorry.
Okay, perfect, excellent. No, excellent presentation. And it actually links back to a lot of what has been said earlier this week, where a lot of, I guess, both ADB and other partners noted that there isn't enough work on the nutrition side of nature-based solutions. So it sounds like we're ticking the climate change box, we tick the nutrition box, and you know, the agricultural productivity box as well, because yields for rice did not go down. Excellent. So we don't discuss this now because we'll go through the rest of the presentations. Our second presenter is Diego Naziri. He's with the International Potato Center, and I think he's based in Hanoi, Vietnam, because I've met him there. And he's going to talk about minimizing genetic erosion and enhancing conservation and use of agrobiodiversity in northwestern mountainous region of Vietnam. It's a very long title, and we look very much forward to hearing from you, Diego. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are awaking from the heavy lunch. So thank you for the brief presentation. So basically, I'm going to present the work we are doing with the CGR initiative on nature positive solution related to this topic that I'm not going to repeat. As most of you are aware, agrobiodiversity refers to the biological diversity of agricultural, livestock, fishery, and forest systems. And in this presentation, I will focus specifically on crop agrobiodiversity at species and varietal level. Perhaps here? Yeah. So agrobiodiversity contributes to several of the Sustainable Development Goals. I will not spend time on that, but I will spend a bit of time to discuss how this contributes to to multiple dimensions of food security. In terms of food availability, many smallholder farmers grow different crop species and varieties to meet their daily dietary needs. And there is also evidence that farmers managing high-level diversity are less likely to face issues related to food insecurity. In terms of access, native species and varieties are locally available and often traded through short supply chains. And these are also highly nutritious and contribute to diverse and healthy diets, also because they typically require less harmful input. Finally, the diversification and cultivation of locally adapted crops are critical to the resilience of the agri-food system, including to climate change, and they contribute to the stability of food, which is the fourth pillar of food security. You're gonna come? Yes. So a bit of background. Vietnam is really an important center of agrobiodiversity at the crop and genetic resource level. But there is growing recognition about the loss of agrobiodiversity, and this has been highlighted in two key recent policies. One is the National Biodiversity Strategy under the Ministry of Environment, and the National Action Plan for Food System Transformation under the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. Both these policies recognize that the loss of agrobiodiversity affects the resilience of production system and livelihoods, especially for smallholder farmers. But it's also recognized that the reliance on very few crops and varieties, cultivated very intensively, has indeed contributed to achieve food security in Vietnam, but sometimes at the expenses of nutrition security. However, there is significant cultural diversity and indigenous food systems which can support transition towards more sustainable agricultural systems. So the initiative on Nature Positive Solution, or Nature Plus, address these challenges and opportunities at crops, fruit and forestry, and also at soil level. But again, as I mentioned before, I will focus only at crop level. At this level, there is evidence that the agrobiodiversity is being lost, but there is limited evidence about the genetic erosion at varietal level, loss of land races, and areas. And there is a need to establish a system to monitor the temporal and spatial variation of agrobiodiversity. And as said by the famous Peter Drucker, you can't manage what you cannot measure. Oh, again. So therefore, the International Potato Center, the Alliance Biodiversity and SIAT are partnering with the Gene Bank in Vietnam, so the Plant Resource Center, to establish a system of continuous monitoring of agrobiodiversity using semi-standardized tools. And in these maps, I show the location where we work. As mentioned before by Christine and Sedi, we work in northwest mountainous region of Vietnam, specifically in the district of Mai Son in Son La province and Sapa in Lao Cai. So the first step, if we want to build a baseline, the first step is to have, if we want to establish a monitoring system, the first step is to build a solid baseline. And so we train the staff of the Gene Bank on some selected tools which were introduced by the International Potato Center. These tools were jointly reviewed and validated and adapted, and then they were deployed. Basically, we used the following tools for the preliminary baseline assessment, with the so-called qualitative red listing that perhaps is better known as a 5 cells method, which is a participatory technique to assess the amount and distribution of local crop diversity within farming communities, with the objective to identify common, rare, but also unique varieties, but also to understand the reason why farmers maintain certain varieties or why certain varieties are being lost. We also ran extensive household survey. We deployed the quantitative red listing and participatory GIS. So a bit of the preliminary results. What we found is that the average farm size and area allocated to annual crops, other crops, and home gardens is much larger in Mai Son than in Sapa. But it's interesting to note that despite the home gardens occupy a tiny area of a farm, they host most of diversity. It's quite impressive because in each home garden, we found an average of 12 to 19 different species, mostly vegetables. While, as you can see here, for annual crops and other crops, on average, we found 2 to 4 species. Then we also disaggregate information by different ethnic minority groups. And we found that the Thai and Kin groups in Son La manage much more species in the home gardens, most probably because they have larger home gardens, while the other two groups, Zhao and Hmong in Sapa, manage much more species diversity per unit of area. Now I discuss about a bit of diversity at a species level, but for 4 crops, actually, we decide to dig deeper and we analyze diversity at varietal level. The 4 crops are banana, taro, pumpkin, and mustard. So we found again a lot of diversity for pumpkin and banana in Maison, while for taro and mustard in Sapa. We found that the Thai ethnic group managed the highest number of varieties. But also interesting, we found one ethnic group, the Kin, where they have high interspecific diversity and low intraspecific. Means they tend to grow many species of particularly vegetables, but very few varieties. And as I mentioned before, we are running participatory GIS to see the geographical distribution of this diversity and to link with several factors such as distance from a village or altitude or other factors. In terms of genetic erosion, we found that banana and pumpkin in Maison and taro in both Maison and Sapa are a high risk of genetic erosion, of cultivar loss, but also there are issues with mustard in Maison and banana in Sapa. But the key message here is that we found more threats of cultivar loss for bananas and taros, and generally more in Maison, where we already found 3 varieties of pumpkins that have been lost by farming communities. And we have to investigate a bit deeper whether this is related to the fact that in this location there is much more market orientation than in the other one. This is my last slide. Okay, we are doing all this in-depth assessment and documentation of diversity, but we are also making efforts to promote the conservation and the use of this diversity. And particularly, I structured this around 4 pillars. The first is about capacity development. For instance, we organize an exchange visit to Peru. Peru is a sort of laboratory of good practices for conservation and use of diversity. So participants from Peru and other countries were exposed to several experiences related to in situ conservation, farmers' rights, value chains, and so on. We're also linking conservation monitoring to decision support systems. We are conducting morphological characterization, all these unique varieties we are finding in the field to develop ultimately a diversity catalog with the gene bank. We are now working on DNA fingerprinting for rigorous comparison of the diversity found in the field and the collection in the gene bank. And we are attempting to establish an active flow of plant genetic resources and information between ex situ and in situ, so between the gene bank and the field. She's putting pressure on me, I'm gonna wrap up. Finally, we are leveraging different aspects for agrobiodiversity conservation and use. For instance, we explore opportunities for linking agrobiodiversity to niche markets and the booming ecotourism industry in our area. We are working with primary and secondary schools to mainstream agrobiodiversity in education and the linkages with health, nutrition, and indigenous knowledge. You can see some of the school gardens we are establishing. We are exploring opportunity to establish public and private incentives for agrobiodiversity conservation and use. And we have also established the nutritional value of some of these unique varieties through support received from another program, the ASEAN CGR program. And last but not least, we are working with policymakers from the Ministry of Environment and Ministry of Agriculture to understand how we can contribute to their strategies. And one of the important things we have done was a national consultation workshop that we ran in November last year to identify opportunities and challenges for collaboration and lessons learned for past experience. I stop here. Thank you very much. If you have questions later on. And my contact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, you know, we all talk about biodiversity, but it's really good to know what it actually means. And then ADB and ABD, so it's very interesting, right? I was like, oops, is it ABD or ADB? So yeah, strong connections, at least in the letters. So I think a lot of potential collaboration going forward. We've now heard from crops, and we now move into trees. And so the next presentation will be presented by Riina Halonen, I don't know how to pronounce her name, and she can maybe do it again. And she is with the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SIAT. And yeah, she will talk to us about trees. Over to you, Riina. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. So I will share my presentation. I hope you can hear me well, calling from Malaysia. Yes, it's a good opportunity to continue after Diego and talk a little bit about the tree component on farms and what is the data that we are observing, what are those challenges and potential solutions that farmers recognize in terms of integrating more trees on their land. I would love to recognize our key partners at the Northern Mountainous Agriculture and Forest Science Institute in Vietnam, who have contributed really importantly to this research. So the region where we are working in the Northern Mountainous Vietnam has been heavily affected by land degradation. This is due to multiple factors such as agriculture expansion, monocrop plantations of trees, overuse of herbicides that leave the ground cover exposed and prone to erosion, and also increasingly climate change. And of course, the implications for the farming households are very severe. So they have no choice but to abandon the land and just hope that they can return the next year to cultivate that area again. Native tree species and varieties are important sources of ecosystem services and adaptive capacity. So these trees can provide both public and private goods, so food and income for the household, but also services such as helping to control erosion, helping to temper the microclimate and retain water resources and so on. But of course, with the loss of natural forest cover, this native diversity has substantially reduced in Vietnam. These challenges are not unique to Vietnam, actually, as I think you very well know. Most of the countries in the region are suffering from same issues. But Vietnam is unique in the sense that they have actually managed to increase forest and tree cover through extensive planting programs. The remaining challenge is that these planting programs have really focused on monocrops of exotic plantations, and so they have not compensated for the loss of ecosystem services that native vegetation used to provide. There is increasing recognition among policymakers that the country needs to get better in terms of integrating more native diversity, more local varieties of trees in these production systems and landscapes, so that some of those ecosystem services that are crucial for agriculture production can be restored. But there are many knowledge gaps in the process. For example, what are those tree species that are really suited for the local land use objectives? So providing those both those private and public goods, and also the site context, especially when we consider change in climate and how that affects the distribution of species. And also, of course, what are the incentives that are required to support this integration of trees in production systems? Okay. So we carried out a household survey with 250 households in 3 provinces in this northern mountainous region. And the purpose was to understand what are the species that farmers are growing and why in terms of trees. What is the local ecological knowledge that the farmers are having about the species and the traits, especially since this area has a very high proportion of indigenous peoples. And also we wanted to understand the constraints and potential solutions that farmers would propose in terms of how can we better integrate more trees in the production systems. The results showed that farmers are having still very high diversity of tree species on their land. So we documented more than 200 tree species on these 250 farms, and not just any species, so species that farmers identified as being important for their livelihoods or for subsistence or for ecosystem services, often all of those. The most common reasons that farmers mentioned for growing these trees or maintaining these trees on their land were, unsurprisingly, income, home consumption, production of wood for construction, and also ecosystem services. So for example, helping to control erosion or providing shade for coffee trees or other crops. And the species that we documented were really a mix of native species and exotic species and local varieties and improved varieties. So some of the species are exotic, for example, mangoes, but they have been grown in the area for hundreds of years, and quite many farmers still use traditional varieties and land races of these species. And farmers also were heavily relying on kind of informal supply chains for the planting material. So getting material by collecting seed themselves in their own farm or in the landscape, or from friends or neighbors in the same village. There was some buying also from traders outside of the village, but that was played a smaller role in the supply chain. And you can see in this table the species that were most commonly mentioned, mostly fruit tree species, but also several species with other purposes such as timber and medicine. The results also show that farmers retain very detailed knowledge about species traits, and different species were recognized of having different purposes and different benefits in the farming system. So some were good for soil fertility improvement, others were good for drought resistant, others were appreciated because they provided food or income during the lean season when there were few other sources of food or income available on the farm. The results suggest that it's good to really have a mix of different species in the system as they provide these complementary services and goods. In terms of the barriers for integrating more trees in production systems, unsurprisingly, lack of markets and issues with markets came out as a top concern for farmers. So they mentioned that they find it difficult to access markets. Prices are low or fluctuating, and also it's very difficult to transport the produce to markets. They were hoping to receive better information about markets and prices. They recognized that intermediaries have impact in terms of the income that they or profits that they can make, and suggested that it would be good to have collectors or cooperatives who could actually buy directly on farms. So many of the issues that we know are important. In terms of access to production inputs, lack of land, lack of labor, and lack of money to invest in production. There's a lot of out-migration and seasonal migration away from these areas. So labor is really a big concern for adoption of any nature-positive practices. And there were also several issues mentioned in relation to planting material for trees. So for example, lack of knowledge about what species could be planted where, what varieties are suitable for what conditions, and that many of the new varieties that could maybe provide better income opportunities were actually considered unsuitable for those local conditions that are quite marginal. Varieties were expensive and seedlings were considered to be poor quality. And so in terms of these issues, farmers were requesting to have better access to low interest loans and also to get support for obtaining good quality seedlings. And finally, they mentioned several environmental or kind of biological constraints, such as the drought, frost, poor soil quality, landslides, pests and diseases, that together result in variable yields of the species. And because of the long growth cycle of trees, and especially many native trees, it was difficult for farmers to predict and kind of have confidence that if they invest in planting these species on their land, that would benefit them in the future.
1 minute?
And here, yes.
Yeah, you heard 1 minute? Yeah.
No, I didn't. Okay, I did now. Thank you. Okay, so I'll wrap up. Yeah, so here they were asking for training on cultivation practices and access to fertilizers, biofertilizers, and so on, and also to support reforestation efforts and provide better payments for ecosystem services for their contribution to actually restoring the native vegetation. Vietnam has a payment for ecosystem service scheme, which is quite advanced in a way, but also the payments are still not yet high enough for many farmers to incentivize them enough. So in terms of how we are now supporting integration of more trees in farms through the Nature Plus initiative, we are developing a catalog of tree species and the traits, combining this local knowledge about the species, the uses, the traits, and the ecosystem services that they provide, and also expert knowledge and knowledge from literature. And this year, we will be experimenting with payments for ecosystem services so that we can support the production of public goods from these lands. We will be using a method that's called stated preference choice experiments and asking farmers to submit small tender bids in a competitive process. And the purpose of this approach is that it helps to take into account the many non-market values that are associated with this native diversity. For example, farmers might be interested to grow these species because of cultural reasons or because they appreciate the contribution to kind of helping to level the income sources or food sources throughout the year. Okay, with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Very, very interesting. I found it particularly interesting. Yes, please, a hand. That farmers know which trees, for example, are prone to fire or are bad for soil erosion. So if we have these payment schemes, maybe we should be supporting particular trees that do a good job and the kind of goals that we'd like to achieve. But anyway, we're now moving to the last presentation, and this is by Salome Gebre-Saber from the International Water Management Institute, and she will talk about the circular economy, which, again, a lot of opportunities, I think, for climate, nature, food interactions. So over to you, Salome.
Yeah. I'm sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Okay. Yeah, we can't see it yet. Not sure if we need computer support. Yes, we can see it now. We're good.
Yeah, we see it.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. From early morning, Accra, Ghana. I'm based in Ghana. Following my colleague's presentation, which focused on the crops, on the trees, and also on the full cost accounting of our food production, we now delve into circular economy in food system transformation. So why circular agriculture? Before we go to what circular economy is and how it contributes to food security, I would like to first look at the agriculture in Vietnam. Agriculture in Vietnam has seen a growth over the past 20 years, tremendous growth, and this has propelled the country to be one of the top ranks exporters of agricultural commodities such as rice and coffee. While intensified crop production systems and high-yield model varieties address some of the food security challenges, this has also resulted in production of huge amounts of crop residues. So as agriculture dominant country, for example, Vietnam produces about 100 million tons of crop residues annually. And if we look at the livestock sector also, it produces more than 80 million tons of manure every year. And if this waste, while they are good resource, if they are not managed well, it has environmental and health implications. the shift to circular economy is very critical at this point. Currently, our system is linear, where we extract resources from our natural capital, we produce, we consume, and then we waste and we dispose it. However, circular economy model is a model where it replaces the end-of-life concept with the one where we use our resources efficiently for as long as it's possible. So it is based on 3 circular principles for food transformation, which are eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products at the highest value, and also regenerate nature. Therefore, this is basically the concept of circular economy. Now, what are the different circular value propositions? Given the local context, different circular economy models or innovations can be developed. So this is what we call as a ladder of increasing value proposition. Through circular economy, we can recover different resources such as water, nutrient, energy, and even animal feed, such as fish feed, which will replace soybean or fish meal-based products. So in this figure, what you see is, at the very least, waste management or treatment of waste should provide value proposition where we should be able to safely dispose our waste. And this will result in safeguarding our water, environmental flows, as well as public health. So this is the minimum value proposition, which is what you see at the left bottom side. But beyond that, we can have different innovations where based on the local context, the capacity, financial capitals or infrastructures that we have, we can recover nutrients, for example. We can recover energy from waste. In some developed countries, they are even recovering potable water from wastewater. Therefore, this is like what we call our opportunities for resource recovery and reuse. And most developing countries are where, and also middle income countries are recovering like energy, nutrients, especially compost and other products. Now, the circular economy in Vietnam, while Vietnam has great potential for circular economy given its agriculture-based country, it has not yet tapped its potential, while it's also getting traction. For example, in the National Action Plan, Vietnam has promoted circular economy, which will contribute to the 2050 targets. And last year in the Vietnam Circular Economy Forum, the Deputy Prime Minister has emphasized that circular economy represents a step forward on Vietnam's journey to sustainable development. So this is a positive step towards transition to circular economy. And while there are some government push towards circular economy, we also see different stakeholders from the private sector, research institutes, and also UN agencies looking at transitioning or promoting the transition to Vietnam's circular economy. And this is one of these initiatives is the initiative by UNDP, where they have set up a Vietnam Circular Economy Hub in collaboration with the Institute of Strategy, Policy, and on Natural Resources and Environment. And within the CGIAR Nature Positive Solutions, we are collaborating with UNDP as well as PSAF to promote circular economy models in coffee and rice value chains in Sola and Kanto. So to understand the circular economy ecosystem, we have done a study on what are the business models which are currently running in Vietnam's coffee and rice value chains. So we did a catalog, we developed a catalog of business models, and I will present 2 of them just to highlight the move towards circular economy in agriculture. So one such business is the Foxing company. This is a private company, and it's collaborating with coffee farmers where they are buying their coffees as well as they are processing the coffee husk to produce organic fertilizer. So this company, it buys the coffee from these farmers, but it also produces compost from these coffee husks, which then supplies it to its coffee farmers for free. So this has provided organic fertilizer back to the farmers. It has also increased incomes of local farmers. Now they don't have to buy. It complements the artificial fertilizers and other organic fertilizers that they use, but it has also resulted in savings in cost for them. It has also created jobs for 60 people. So it has resulted in reduction of pollution associated with improper disposal of coffee husks. Some farmers which use it to burn coffee husks at their farms or dispose it off in the landfill sites. Now this has been used to produce valuable product, which is organic fertilizer. Another similar example is from Laokai, where a farmer cooperative is using rice husk, rice straw, and sawdust. Sawdust is also it's one of the municipal solid waste, organic waste. And this cooperative, they are about 200 households, and they buy rice straw from these households, and they produce compost and mushrooms. And this has also reduced straw burning in rice fields, and it has also resulted in additional income for farmers and jobs for local and women. So while circular economy business models are being implemented in certain areas, it's not very common. So the idea under Nature Positive Solutions Initiative is to first, what are the challenges for these business models not to thrive? So one of the key aspects that we have identified is mostly lack of awareness. For example, farmers are interested in biochar, but there are no value chains where biochar and compost and even briquettes, which is a dry fuel, that is produced from different organic wastes. There is a need from demand side, but the supply side is not there yet. So for transition to a circular economy, this is important because it provides cleaner food production systems through end-of-life management. So circular economy, it decouples our economic growth from consumption or from extraction of our natural capital, therefore using our resources efficiently and replacing that end-of-life concept with the one that reuses, recycles, and recovers products is key to having cleaner food production systems. It also results in closed-loop resource economy and business opportunities. The case studies that I have presented are an example of a closed-loop system. So if you look at our value chains, it stops at food production, but what happens to the food waste, to agri waste, to different organic wastes? We are focusing here on organic waste only. So circular economy provides an integrated system where our food value chains or agricultural value chains are a closed loop system. And nature positive food systems also benefit people and nature. So through circular economy, we regenerate our nature. But for this to happen, we need to accelerate transition to circular economy. And this we plan to do through co-learning or capacity building. So we learn from what are existing innovations in Vietnam and other countries. So in all the target countries that we work under Nature Plus, we look at what are the existing innovations that we can build on. We do stakeholder engagement and business model design and accelerator programs. And particularly in Vietnam, we are collaborating with UNDP and PSAF, which is a partnership for sustainable agriculture in Vietnam, to accelerate circular economy models in Vietnam.
Okay. Perfect. I
With
think
that,
yes, we both agree that it's time. But anyway, very, very interesting. A lot of business models, a lot of opportunities. Obviously, very applicable to other countries in Asia, especially the rice straw solution, I think. And we now, before we go to the Q&A, we have some 2 short interventions from our 2 panelists. And we have Julian Gonzalez. He is with the International Institute for Rural Reconstruction. He's one of our panelists, and our second panelist is Tung Nguyen with the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And I think we start with Julian. Oh, good, we can see both of you, so you can maybe even have a little dialogue. Yeah, so please, so Julian, I think you're based here in the Philippines. What do you think about what you've heard? What are your thoughts? I think you've worked a lot on with participatory methods. What are the strengths? What more should be done? Is there some applicability to the Philippines? So yeah, please, your thoughts. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to focus on the 3 presentations on agrobiodiversity, though I did learn a huge amount from the last presentation. I'm going to get back to that speaker later, but my comments are going to focus on the ABD, the agrobiodiversity presentations. I'm associated with the International Institute of Rural Reconstruction, and we've been working on agrobiodiversity in schools and in communities for about, I would say, 15 to 17 years. More recently, we're connected with 2 other CG initiatives. One is FRESH, and the other one is Climber. So I'll just make a few comments. I'll shut my camera because I've had a little problem with the internet. I'll come back later on that. Yeah. So I thought that we were making a very strong case with evidence for the intensification, for diversity. And I think while all of us have been supporting diversity, now we have evidence. And I sure hope that all this research will continue into a second phase so that we just don't have a snapshot, but we have a deepening of whatever themes were explored. It would take a lot more time. So I assume that's going to happen. So in Naziri's paper, which is the first one I would comment on, the part about emphasizing resilience, sometimes a little bit more than we already emphasized with regard to ecosystem services and nutrition and food security. I think the aspect of resilience is a very important part given the climate change and other considerations. And we're talking about resilience of both livelihoods and production systems. So I think the methodology is particularly exciting, and I'm glad you noted my interest in participatory approaches, participatory research and development. I think that I found this emphasis on a semi-structured approach a really welcome perspective coming from a scientist, because if you want to engage local stakeholders, you're going to have flexible approaches and approaches that are somewhat more adaptive in nature. So I'm delighted to know of this, and I know others, including the other papers of Rina and others, also emphasize that. Of course, both papers emphasized the need for diversity, but I do want to make a point again about the value of participatory research and development as a way of broadening the stakeholder base of people involved in research.
Julian, could you try to put your camera back on just to see if it might work? Because you do, very good, excellent.
Yeah, okay. So you're having trouble with, I'm just worried about the internet connection,
But yeah.
Okay, so the other point I'd like to make is the focus on tree diversity. The point about Vietnam having succeeded with national reforestation, and this is well known, particularly in the north, but making a case for native species is something that's going to require research to come in a little bit more intensively. as not a lot of research and development is being done with regard to native tree species. I think that we have made a strong case for it, but do we have the kind of research that's needed? And is there an investment in national and subnational research systems to be able to support the kind of needs that are needed? It's the kind of research that's needed here. So it's a serious enough bit of work. And so I think there needs to be more investment. And I also noted that there's been considerable investment in capacity development of national researchers. And for those of us who've been around for some time, in the past, our approaches to strengthening of national systems involves considerable investment. And I'm happy to see here you bringing people to travel to other countries, Vietnamese leaders. I don't think that happens. It just requires put the money down where it matters a lot. So bringing researchers, particularly national researchers, to other countries, I think would be something that would need to be done. And I guess the last point would be with regard to the advocating for intensification often lacks the evidence, and I think all the cases, particularly the 3 cases, have made a case for establishing that evidence base. But you were looking at systems that are already fairly diverse at the start, particularly the ones in northern Vietnam. These are ethnic groups, and they were particularly noted for their diversity. I wonder what it would take to introduce diversity into homogeneous systems, even if it's smallholder. What approaches do we need to introduce more diverse systems within more homogeneous systems? What are the incentives? Can we bundle them with other technologies, and something that we need to look at a little bit more? But I enjoyed listening to the presentations, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about the tools that were used. I like the tools that were used because they lend themselves to the community-based work that we're engaged in. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Yeah, no, those are excellent comments and lend themselves to lots of questions if we have time. So this is really great. So yeah, now we'll hear from Tung Nguyen with IFAD. Yeah, so please, your remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting IFAD and myself to say a few words about the presentations and the recommendations on the way ahead. I think that the studies you on the 4 presenters introduced to us are very useful for the organization like ADB or IFAD or another development partners who can cooperate to put the research findings into actions. I am pleased that you select the northern part of Vietnam with ethnic minorities, with the diversity of the resources. And we have been working there also for the past 30 years. So I must say that your findings are very relevant to the context in the region, and also your research recommendations are goal foundation for our program. And also I think we need to cooperate to put the research finding into the action that Diego recommended. The major part for the National Action Plan is the capacity building for the local agencies to implement. In terms of biodiversity, I think we need to cooperate to include also the issues of the water resources, because there are many new hydro stations and changing the biodiversity in terms of water flow and water availability in many villages. And I've been working there for 30 years, and I see that many species of fishes and frog and so on are not anymore there. So the action plan should be include also the fisheries and the research also on the animals in the livestock because the changes in the patterns of the livestock from the indigenous variety into more industrialized, for example, pigs and so on. My next recommendation is that we should have an, like we say, how we say, the cross dimensional or an umbrella research, because in my opinion, the biodiversity is related to the nature positive solution, particular for the north part of Vietnam, the circular economy, circular agriculture, using the model that Vietnamese is a very familiar with the VAC, the integrated agriculture for household level, linking fisheries, livestock, and the plantation. So there are many cross-linking, and I think the nature positive solution or circular economy is the way to go ahead to achieve the objective of the biodiversity and food security for the ethnic minority people there. So we should do some integrated study of the 4 subjects that you presented. So my last point is the way ahead. I'd like to inform that the government is going very soon to establish what they call Sustainable Food System Forum. And it is the partnership between the government and the development partners, and UNDP, FAO, and IFAD are approaching some very, what they call seeds funds, so that we can provide technical assistance to the Ministry of Agriculture in establishing the forum. And under the forum will be 5 working groups. And I would recommend one group should be the nature positive solution working group, and we will continue. So we need to discuss more how we can interact. But I see the most important of the evidence-based research and studies to be conducted by the CGI AR, and we at IFAD look forward to your continued close partnership so that we can in-depth conduct the studies more comprehensively, and also transfer that into the action by the government. And I like to highlight the importance of the action by the localities and the capacity building program for the different levels. And at IFAD, we are working with the Kobil district and province levels, and then so that we can continue to interlink the different aspects of the sustainable food system and assist the government in building the capacity to actually implement that the research recommendation that you present today. Thank you very much again for inviting us to have some words at this dialogue. Thank you very much.
Yep, thank you. A hand to our 2 panelists who I think gave excellent remarks, lots of good recommendations, and obviously I particularly like to hear that Vietnam is starting Sustainable Food System Forum. Nature Positive Solutions was a key action area under the UNFSS, United Food System Summit. And so I think it's good to know that this is actually now being taken forward in Vietnam and hopefully maybe through ASEAN also in other countries. So we are now coming to the Q&A, and I'd like everyone to please turn on their cameras on screen so that you can answer many questions. I have questions, but I also hope that some people in the audience will have some questions. And Diego, if you could maybe also come here onto the podium. So I'll first give a chance to the people in the room who have been listening to a lot of presentations about one country, but of course the issues are quite similar in other Asian countries, and so you might also have some suggestions on where this kind of research could be used by ADB in other countries, etc. So who would like to take the stage? There is a nice microphone. Yes, please. And please introduce yourself.
My name is Vincent Mendoza. I'm a startup founder working with smallholder rice farmers here in the Philippines. My question is, since we already have empirical evidence that nature-positive solutions have direct impact to food security, at least in small communities based on studies, are there available studies, or is it in the pipeline to try to study which approach is best for us so that more farmers can adopt nature-positive solutions, at least in producing food? Thank you.
Okay, that is a big question. More studies that are out there to support the production of nature-positive, or the use of nature-positive solutions in small rice, the application and support to small rice farming systems in the Philippines. And we know the Philippines wants to grow more rice. So there's obviously, I think, some trade-offs and some challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. If we can show that, not just doing rice actually generates more nutrition, more income, then there might be some consideration for that. Do we have another question from the room? For example, from Dr. Iyer, how this links to ADB's program on food, nature, climate.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia, and thanks to the entire panel and all the speakers. It was quite enriching, actually. And of course, this is an area of huge interest for ADB as well, because we see a lot of potential solutions to the problems that exist in food systems today, if these kind of initiatives succeed. And some of the results that were mentioned in Vietnam seem very encouraging. The need for, of course, providing farmers who practice these kind of methods with better remuneration or better profits is, of course, very important. And I thought that was an issue that was raised by the presentation. So it is. There are a lot of elements that are coming together, but others that need to be solved. One thing that I had a question was there any observation on the yields of various crops or various commodities that are being grown, and were yields improving in general, or were they deteriorating for some time and then improving, or were they better for certain types of crops than for others? Is there any conclusion or any observation on this? Because the profits for farmers is also a function of this, and at the same time, better yields means at a certain level more conservation or less requirement of land. So that was a question I had in my mind. Several observations, but I'll limit it to this right now.
Okay, excellent. So again, a reminder, if everyone could turn on their cameras. Yeah, exactly. So we see the gallery now. Okay, so last chance for an audience question, because we also have an online question. No one wants to rush right now to the mics. That's perfectly fine. So now we need to find some respondents. So there's the question from Vincent Mendoza. Small rice farming, if I understand correctly, in the Philippines. How can these small rice systems integrate nature positive solutions? And it also gets us, I think, to the question of Gonzalez, our colleague from the Philippines, Julian Gonzalez, who was asking, you are working in extremely diverse environments already. So how can you incorporate nature positive solutions in more homogeneous environments? We have all of those rice environments across Asia. If you have any suggestions on how to do that. And then some more questions on, are there some yield penalties in early years when you start to introduce some of those nature positive solutions? We have seen from the presentation by Sidi that the rice yield was the same for farmers who used nature positive solutions and those who didn't, so those who used pesticides and things like that. There was not currently a yield penalty, but as you said, maybe there could have been one during the establishment. So let's start with those, and then we go to the online questions. Who would like to take the question on introducing those nature positive solutions? Okay, Rina.
Hey, I'd like to answer the question of Gonzalez on the yield aspects. There is another recent study from Viet Nam looking at agroecological production on tea plantations. And that study showed that the farms that were applying agroecological practices for tea, for example, soil conservation, using organic manure, using shade, and so on. Actually, the yields were lower. However, the profits of the farmers were higher than on the conventional farms, because there was less external inputs, and also the farmers got better price because there was premium for these more kind of organically or more environmentally friendly grown products that were also perceived to be better quality for the farmers. So I think we should not only focus on yield, but we need to look at the cost of inputs versus outputs, and also then the price differences that these products might face on the market. Thank you.
Okay, great. And anything for rice systems, nature positive solutions? Diego, maybe?
So the vast majority of rice in Vietnam is in the lowland in the Mekong Delta. Nevertheless, also where we work, there's quite a lot of rice under terraced conditions. This is more for self-consumption. Very limited amount is actually sold to the market. I think here is a matter of having a more holistic approach. It's not a single technology. It's an holistic approach for a number of benefits, and this is also to get back to the other question. I mean, there are not only monetary benefits in terms of nutrition. I think it's really important to emphasize what is the nutritional value of this, how important it is to have a diversified diet. Of course, then I completely agree with Irina. It's not only a matter of yield, but it's a combination of yield and price. You want to look at the overall profitability of the system. But it's not only around the profitability, it's also around national, let's say, pride. I mean, when we talk with these ethnic minorities, they are quite proud of their diversity. They recognize themselves as a more diversified system than farmers in the south of Vietnam, where there is much more focus on rice and improved variety. I would like also to comment a bit on Julian's question. How do we diversify a bit systems that whose starting point is not so diversified as it is in the mountainous areas of Vietnam? Well, I think a lot is around access to planting material. We, for instance, in the case of the International Potato Center, we have a lot of experience in Peru. We are mandate for maintaining the germplasm in the gene bank for potato and sweet potato. In the case of potato, if I remember well, we have 8,000 accessions, including crop-wide relatives. But in Peru, this diversity was largely disappearing. The point was to identify some what we call custodian farmers that they maintain an amazing diversity in their fields. We're talking about 50 to 100 varieties each. In Peru at the moment, farmers are growing about 4,000 native varieties of potatoes. It's really impressive. But many of these varieties were actually lost. And even area where it was moving into more monocropping and using modern varieties, actually they start realizing naturally that they wanted to reintroduce this material, but it was not available. So it was a lot of effort to link the gene bank with these places to allow a continuous flow of genetic material, also because potatoes and other vegetably propagated crops tend to accumulate virus over generations. So farmers at the center point were unable to replant the same material, and they had to get back, they can now get back to us and get clean planting material. So one of the problems is that if the system is little diversified, it's difficult to access the planting material of these native varieties, and there is work to be done around that. The other is to create economic incentives for people to trigger basically their interest in maintaining this variety. So linking to market, now we were able to identify some of these potatoes with unique traits and unique colors, and now they are exported or sold in the airport, and it's a fancy product to take to your friend when you are invited for dinner. So also the perception of the consumers, you have to work around that, engaging with the cooks. There are, all their work done with top restaurants to really reintroduce in the culture of people that this is not the product of the poor, that was the kind of mentality that we have to a bit address. And I think that it's complex, but I think another element is to work into intergenerational knowledge exchange, working for schools, engaging with the parents, and making sure that they realize the importance of the treasury they are maintaining. So a bit of that. And then on Tung, we are already engaging with the technical working groups on agroecology and nature-based solutions for implementing the partnership for food system transformation. So we really hope to be able to contribute more. Over.
Okay, great. I think one way also to grow diversity is maybe to introduce some price, right? How many types of livestock species do you have? How many types of whatever? Rice, other varieties, other crops do you grow in your farm, and you don't have to have a very big field to show that you can grow more varieties. And we heard a lot of those, also some varieties were grown in home gardens. Now not different varieties of rice, but other crops. So I think if there is a real program at the national level, and it sounds like Viet Nam is establishing that and maybe has other elements already, you can get that down to the province, and then you can have, a price at the district level, or the top price at the province level, and on it can go. So I think there's a lot of ways, to incentivize without actually using a lot of money. And I'm always surprised how resourceful farmers can be if they, for whatever reason, see a reason to do something. There is a prize, and then there will be whatever, you will be featured in the newspaper. So there could be all kinds of ways to increase diversity without actually having to put a lot of money on the table. So I think, and then could be international fairs, and I'm sure there is a lot of things. There are probably a lot of things happening. But again, as we said, there's information, some capacity building, and also a serious political will, to go beyond rice is everything we care about. That political will has to come from the top. If that's not there, then of course sometimes farmers will not. It will be more difficult for them to see the incentives. We also have a question, and I know we didn't answer the question if yields are lower in early years under nature positive solutions, but let's answer that together with the other question we got online. There's a question, I think that's to Solomi. It says, in the Philippines, there are startup social enterprises doing circular economy. However, the efforts are mostly private, and government has not attempted to integrate. Since the Philippines is not as big a producer as Vietnam, will there be a chance that these players can be noticed and integrated? I think that also maybe gets us to what Solomi already said. It seems to be private sector actors who are coming up with these circular economy solutions, rice straw to grow mushrooms, coffee husks to do something else. And I guess the government is not really supportive of such processes. And, you know, there's always the question, do you want the government? Because once the government gets involved, it might actually not come, the outcomes might worsen, so you might actually not be doing necessarily much better. But this is a request, a question, you know, why there's no government support, specifically here for the Philippines, but it might also be good to hear, how these circular approaches are being supported in Vietnam. And then if someone can also just say a little bit about nature-based solutions, and if, again, I start from a homogeneous area, I'm serious about integrating nature-based solutions, will I have a yield penalty for a couple years? Okay, so who wants, so Solomi maybe? Oh yeah, yes, please. Yes, okay.
Thank you. So just to supplement what Claudia said, from our perspective, from ADB's perspective, we are always looking also at the Pacific Island countries, where there is issue of food security, right? And these are classic, small islands, often, maybe qualifying under the homogeneous definition, because there's not, though strictly, I mean, I would hesitate to just call it homogeneous, but the variety is obviously restricted because geographically they're small. So can these techniques be, used there to at least make them reasonably self-sufficient and hence more food secure?
Yeah.
Maybe even better nutrition and nutrition secure.
Yes.
And also, yes, and touching on the yield thing. Again, from a food security perspective, availability is one important aspect of food security. And it is also not the only function, but a strong function of production. So from that perspective, yields do matter, especially in... So while I accept that incomes to farmers are important, and if your costs are low, then obviously profits are higher. But from a larger population perspective, from a food security perspective, and trying to balance that with the need to use as less land as possible to, to achieve other objectives of biodiversity, yields are important. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because otherwise someone else will have to grow more somewhere else. So maybe Solomi, quickly on the, your perception of the circular approaches, government involvement, for better or worse.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Claudia. I think from the perspective of business model acceleration in circular economy or any other sector, the role of the government is to create an enabling environment so that those businesses can flourish. But particularly in circular economy, it needs more support in terms of infrastructure. So if you look at Philippines, for example, there are some push towards transition to circular economy, like the Philippines National Development Plan. It emphasizes the need for sustainable production and consumption systems. But if you look at on the ground, as the person who has put the question put forward, there is a lack of enforcement of some of those policies, or some of those enabling environment are not yet materializing. So you see private sector startups doing at a small scale circular economy businesses. And another thing, apart from the government, the financial sector is very absent in funding circular economy models. So if you look, we have done investment climate assessment in different countries, and one of the key aspects that we have identified is that most of these businesses, they use their own capital, or some of them they get equity funding from their uncle or their brother, or it's their own savings, but they are not yet being financed by financial institutions. And that's why you need support, incentive mechanisms for businesses to flourish. And another thing that we observe is that sometimes the playing is not a level field for circular economy businesses to compete, where you have fossil fuel-based businesses which have been there for quite some time. So if you look at artificial fertilizers, they have been subsidized in certain countries. So if you come up with compost, they are not being subsidized. So how are these compost businesses going to compete with this? So that's why we see a lot of circular economy businesses at informal level or pilot level. They don't grow. So our approach here is one, to provide awareness creation, capacity building to different actors, including those which are in the public sector as well as the partners, but also innovation hubs or stakeholder platforms are important. If those startups that you mentioned in Philippines, in Vietnam, for example, UNDP in collaboration with another partner, they have set up circular economy hub. So if you have a hub, you have convening power for the voices to be heard as well, to make your case into the government policies and so on. So in different countries, we see hubs or circular economy stakeholder platforms being created so that there is acceleration. So the issue is not only from the government side, but also from financial institutions. They have to be able to fund these circular economy solutions, but they are not aware of it. Nobody is approaching them. So we need to bring them on board. So if you look at workshops, most of the times we have private entities and government and national partners and so on, but financial sectors are still to be brought on board for this to be accelerated. Over to you.
Okay, we are kind of out of time, but maybe Sedi, you just maybe one sentence on what's your assessment on yield penalty from the household survey so far?
Yes, very quickly, and thank you for that question. So, of course, many other studies in other parts of the world, but including Southeast Asia, have shown that you do have this kind of dip at the beginning when you start, adopting those more sustainable techniques, agroecological, when you go through this agroecological transformation. And the payback period can actually be quite long, as long as, well, several years for sure, depending on the countries where those studies were run. In our case, unfortunately, what we can see is that based on the different adoption rates, high adopters versus low adopters, with this snapshot, we don't see this penalty, we don't see this difference in yields between those different groups, but we cannot disaggregate by, let's say, the longevity, so the time that they've been using those techniques for now. It's definitely an interesting research question that we will explore over time as we continue with data collection.
Okay, and with this, we are bringing the session to a close. I was asked to give some concluding statements, but seriously, I think we all have heard everything. I think what stands out to me is diversity retains productivity, at least so far, using a snapshot. Diversity supports nutrition. I think that's key, because in another presentation I showed that between 70 and 80% of the population in this region cannot afford a healthy diet, and these kind of systems, can support a much healthier diet. There's still a lot of questions on incentives. There is also the need to bring this into the national policies and to get really national push. There is some signs that there's more things happening today than before, because I think increasing understanding that biodiversity loss affects our future or puts our own future of humanity in question. And I guess I think a request to this very excellent program to go into some more homogeneous systems, and then to actually do some very hard work there to make them more heterogeneous. And so thanks again, please, to our panelists and to our presenters. If you could just give them a hand, and also thanks to you for staying with us through the entire time. So I think it was an excellent session. We will obviously also promote it, and we'll and hope to engage with you going forward in this process and with these solutions. Thanks so much again. Thank you.